This is Cultural Debris with host Alan Cornett.
Welcome back to Cultural Debris, and welcome for the very first time to the Cultural Debris YouTube channel. This is the very first episode that we have had on YouTube, and so I welcome you here. Thanks for stopping by. My hope is for most episodes going forward to be available in both the traditional audio format, where Cultural Debris has lived for the past couple of years, but now also on YouTube. Now, every episode may not make it here, but that's my hope, and we will see. I beg your patience as I'm working on the process of editing and delivering these episodes. It's new territory for me and requires some extra work. So my hope is to get these things sort of streamlined, and we'll get there. But we're here now, so thank you for being here. I have learned that there are a lot of people who prefer to have their podcasts on YouTube, and some people who will only watch them on YouTube. So we're trying to meet that demand, and hopefully there will be demand here for that. This past week, we heard the sad news that America lost one of its greatest novelists, certainly one of the great novelists of the past half century, and one of the greatest novelists America has produced. That's Cormac McCarthy. His early years were focused on Appalachian fiction in a very gritty, maybe over-realistic way. And then later, he began focusing on the American Southwest. You should read some Cormac McCarthy. It's not to everyone's taste. It's not light. It's not a pick-me-up. But he is one of our great writers. And he's someone people will still be reading 100 years from now, without question. And certainly American letters will miss him. My guest is Dale Ahlquist, and I'm going to talk more about Dale in a moment. He is president of the G.K. Chesterton Society. He and his wife, Laura, traveled with Tom Ruby and me to Genoa on our very first series of Cultural Debris Excursions. We were thrilled to have them. He and I are going to talk about that in the interview, but I'm bringing it up to tell you we're doing it again this fall. Dale isn't going, I don't think, but maybe he will. But Tom Ruby and I are going. We have some of our spots already filled up, but we have a few openings. Each week is limited to 6 people, plus Tom and me, and that is intended to be small on purpose so that we get to know each other and we can have the kind of interaction that you can't possibly have with a big group. Come with us. The first week, we're going to be in Tuscany, we're going to Siena, and we are going to Florence. The second week, we're going to Genoa, which is where we went last year. It's going to be a somewhat different itinerary. Some things we'll see will be the same, but there's going to be a lot of difference. Genoa is an amazing place. It has one of the best preserved old cities, the old city centers in really all of Europe. It's an amazing place. We would like for you to come with us. Contact me at culturaldebrispodcast@gmail.com. You should definitely go. There will be beautiful sights, there will be tremendous food, and there will be scintillating conversation. Also, you might consider becoming a patron of Cultural Debris at patreon.com/Cultural Debris. You can support the podcast for as little as $2 a month. And I will say, I appreciate your support, and I am thankful for all the patrons that I currently have and have had in the past. My poem is from Gilbert Keith Chesterton. That seems to be a theme. And it is called Elegy in a Country Churchyard. The men that worked for England, they have their graves at home. and bees and birds of England about the cross can roam. But they that fought for England, following a falling star, alas, alas for England, they have their graves afar. And they that rule in England, in stately conclave met, alas, alas for England, they have no graves as yet. As I said, my guest is Dale Ahlquist, who has made the study and promotion of the works and ideas of G.K. Chesterton his life's work, and we are thankful for it. He and I preview the upcoming Chesterton Society Conference. We discuss the growth of the Chesterton School network, as well as the status of the campaign to have G.K. Chesterton officially declared a saint. Dale's thoughts on traveling to Genoa are also included because he went on our Cultural Debris Excursion last fall, as I said. Please join me as I speak with Dale Ahlquist. Dale Ahlquist, welcome to Cultural Debris.
And thank you, Alan. A very great opportunity to be with you. Thank you.
Well, you are usually traveling about, globe-trotting and nation-trotting, I guess, so it's nice to catch you not somewhere else. Where have you been lately?
Well, I had a series of trips around the country to new Chesterton academies that were having their major gala events, and so I did 6 cities in 4 weeks. I was in Portland, Oregon, Salt Lake City, Utah, Omaha, Nebraska, Wichita Falls, Texas, and obviously 2 other places because I think I only listed 4.
Well, I'm sure they remember you fondly.
Orlando, Florida was one of them.
I've heard of it.
There's another one. All right.
Well, it's fine. I'm not grading you on it, but well, welcome back home, I guess. Maybe you'll be there for a little while before you have to run off again.
Milwaukee in just a couple days. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Well, you've got a conference to get ready for. I suppose things are heating up along those lines. Tell me about your Chesterton conference this summer.
Well, one of the unusual things about the conference is that I won't have to leave home to attend it this year. It used to be in the Twin Cities up until 2008. So just think, we haven't been held a conference here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota since 2008. So we got a little homecoming here, and it's a little easier to get ready for a conference when it's local. But one of the great highlights, of course, of this year's conference is that you will be a speaker, Alan. Yes.
Well, I better get something written for that.
Yes, you should. And I am very excited about you speaking there because we've never had a talk on Russell Kirk before, and it seems strange, but at least not during my tenure. And I've been attending Chesterton conferences since 1990, and there hasn't been a Russell Kirk talk there. So, I mean, he was still alive when
that's right.
Yeah,
you could have had him yourself.
Yeah, we could have had him yourself. And I wouldn't be surprised if he spoke at conferences previous to the ones that I started to attend. But great Chestertonian, great American thinker, and we're really curious and looking forward to see how you're going to put the two great men together, especially knowing
you and me both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know that Russell Kirk was just a great admirer of Chesterton. In fact, he served on the Chesterton Society board when the Chesterton Review was being printed by the first Chesterton Society. So so that's going to be good. But after that dazzling highlight, we have lesser speakers coming in, like Bishop Robert Barron.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Yes, he's one of our speakers. And then we have the Joseph Pierce and the rest of the troubadours, the motley crew consisting of Christopher Check, Catholic Answers, and Dr. William Fahey, the president of St. Thomas More College of the Liberal Arts, and Dan Kerr, who's the founder and president of St. Martin's Academy, an amazing school in Kansas. But both Dan Kerr and Joseph Pierce will be giving individual talks, and Joseph has just come out with a new history of England, and he'll be giving a talk on the Dark Ages to the Middle Ages. I should mention that the theme of the conference this year is St. Francis of Assisi, or we call the Jugglers of God, because it's 100 years since Chesterton's book on St. Francis was published. So we'll be focusing a little bit more on Francis, although the talks will cover a wide variety of subjects. We also have
William. I was going to say William Fahey, who you mentioned in the Troubadours. I first met in Mecosta, Michigan, long ago. When he and I were both much younger, and he was serving as an assistant himself for Russell Kirk back then.
Oh, fantastic! Well, at least you'll have one person in your audience, and that's great.
That's right. Well, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. He's like, I know that guy. I'm not going to go hear him.
And William Fahey's one of the wittiest and most erudite men I've known. He's read just about everything, and he can condense it and relate it so well with just his wonderful, gracious sense of wit too. But one of the talks I'm really looking forward to is Professor Tom Martin, who just recently retired from the University of Nebraska at Kearney, where he ran the philosophy department there. He's been a pillar of the Chesterton Society for many years. Marvelous speaker, marvelous thinker, and an imposing fellow, 6'6" with a big white snowy beard. And he will fill the room with his voice, and he's just outside. He's going to be talking about Chesterton and Solzhenitsyn, which is something I don't think we've ever done before either. I certainly don't recall it. And then we have some. We have the Chesterton himself in the form of John Walker, a professor of arts from Steubenville at the Franciscan University there, who looks just like Chesterton and has the same massiveness of Chesterton. It's a great experience because it is like being in the room with the man himself. He's got the great joy and gives us the sense of the absent-mindedness and the sense of wonder that comes from Chesterton. And he'll be doing some passages and some reflections on the St. Francis book. And just a couple other highlights, Alan. We'll have some small breakout groups on different subjects, including localism and Chesterton's ideas on Catholic social teaching, and the home, the small business, the field, the education, of course, taking control of our children's education, which is really one of the great works of the Chesterton Society these days, as we run the Chesterton Schools network and the many classical Catholic schools that are the Chesterton academies around the country. So those are the highlights. It's going to be just a terrific gathering of folks. Every time there is a conference, as you know, having been to only one, but the one you were at last year, we have not only the great talks, but there's a time of just interaction with the other attendees that is priceless and unmatched. We have a very vibrant afterglow at the end of every evening that
indeed
lasts late into the night.
Right. I think they outlasted me, but I, for as long as I could stay with the young folks, I did enjoy them. That was the last year, of course, as you mentioned, was my first conference, and it was a lot of fun. I not only enjoyed the speakers, but the people and events surrounding the formal talks, getting to interact with people, the masses that were offered. and the afterglow was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's the total package, and we really encourage people to come, whether you know a lot about Chesterton or know virtually nothing at all. You will be rewarded, and it definitely edified, but also just spiritually uplifted.
Yeah, I don't think people need to think that they need to be an expert on Chesterton in order to attend. I think they would get quite a lot out of it.
Yeah, no matter what their interest is, because uh, they'll find common sense, and also they'll find profound truths, and you're connecting with a real wide variety of folks there, and that's what's so, I think, sparkling about the whole thing.
Well, and obviously somebody like Bishop Barron is a high profile sort of fellow. To me, it was impressive that he has the interest in Chesterton that he would want to come to the conference.
Yeah, I've always been aware of his great interest in Chesterton, and I was so pleased that he immediately said yes when we invited him. Fortunately, he's closer to us than he used to be. He recently was relocated to be the bishop of Rochester, Winona, which is the diocese immediately to the south of St. Paul and Minneapolis. So it's just a trip up the road for him.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I watched his the documentary that he did on Chesterton a couple of years ago, and it's very moving. Though those are brilliant episodes. I would encourage anybody to watch that. I think it's about an hour or so.
Yeah, they're called the pivotal players series.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And there's an hour on Chesterton as well as other great Catholic figures.
Yeah, but I really did enjoy the one on Chesterton. Of course, he spends time in England where Chesterton was, and goes to his home and so forth. And so it's if somebody wants a very well done introduction to Chesterton, I think that's a good place to go. Very high production levels and so forth, and thoughtful. So the Chesterton conferences, I mean, they've gotten to the point where they're attracting heavy hitters like Bishop Barron. Since you have been attending and also then putting together Chesterton conferences, how have you seen the conferences grow and interest in Chesterton grow?
Well, I attended my first Midwest Chesterton conference in 1990, as I said, and there were 25 people sitting around on folding chairs, and I was the only non-Catholic in the room at that point, and I was also the only one there who was under the age of 55. And I was at that point well under that age, and so it was the old guard, but they were a group of wonderful, wonderful people who. They turned in unit. I walked in a little late, and their heads turned in unison and watched me come in, and I could tell that they had their prey. They knew that they had to seize me and take me over, which is what they did exactly. Some of the most lovely, wonderful folks. I don't think hardly any of them are still alive anymore, but they not only, I would say, escorted me to the Catholic Church, but they provide such an amazing example of joyful, Catholic, profound, active folks who just epitomize G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton is the complete thinker, I call him, but his ideas are as practical as they are, theoretical, and they just lived it out. And so they were a great inspiration. I loved attending those conferences. They started growing each year. They got a little bigger. I started pushing them. And they were getting pretty old by the end of the 90s. And I started the American Chesterton Society in 96. And in 97 brought the conference from Milwaukee then to the Twin Cities, and we headed there, as I said, for the next 11 years. And each year it got bigger and bigger, but was still a free conference back then. Not only that, not only was the conference free, we gave away free beer.
I think you have to go to the Afterglow for any sort of freebies like that now, I think. But...
Right. Yeah, you don't get the free beer until the Afterglow now.
That's right.
But and so, even though it was free and we gave away free beer, we still lost money.
So what possessed you long ago in 1990? It's long ago, but I still remember 1990. What possessed you to go to that meeting? Why you, a non-Catholic, a young man, going into with a group of not young men to talk about G.K. Chesterton?
Yeah, great question. I started reading Chesterton about a decade before that, and ended up doing a master's degree on Chesterton and Kierkegaard and the concept of paradox. And at that point, I thought I was probably the only person in the world interested in Chesterton. I had not met anyone else at that point. And then I discovered this group that had once a year met in Milwaukee. And it was a real thrill for me to meet them, because I realized there's other people like me out there, even though they were all much older and all Catholic. But it was really fun to find these like-minded folks who had the same enthusiasm for G.K. Chesterton that I had. That was just a great thrill, because I really had been the Lone Ranger, I felt, until then. And even then, I had an evangelistic pizzazz. I wanted other people to read Chesterton. I was always pushing him on other people. But my involvement with just that small ad hoc group of people became a much more organized force. And we started the Chesterton Society. I got the show on EWTN. After my conversion, I was invited to do a television series on Chesterton, and that just led to a huge exposure to this thinker, and the revival at that point was really kicking off. And so just to answer your question about the growth of the conference, it's been in a different city every year since 2009, and we get more people always locally attending, but then there's the faithfuls who come from whatever part of the country. They'll always attend the conference. So our overall numbers have grown tremendously, but the interest in Chesterton keeps growing, and the variety of the clientele, because he just appeals all across the spectrum.
Well, you've started, or I guess it has been expanding. I don't suppose it was started particularly recently, but you just mentioned that you were traveling around to the new Chesterton academies. How did the academy start? And obviously the academies themselves are a way to spread knowledge about Chesterton, but also live out Chestertonian ideals. When did the school start, and how did they explode like they have?
Sure. Well, the first school started in 2008, again here in the Twin Cities. Another gentleman and myself co-founded the first one. And it was, the idea was to have a classical Catholic high school that was affordable. Those are basically the three things we wanted. You couldn't find all three of those together in any of the other options that were out there. You could maybe find two, but maybe just one, or maybe none of those things. And so that was our formula. It was going to be Catholic, classical, and affordable. And I told the other gentleman who was the co-founder, I said, and if we use Chesterton as our patron and as our model thinker, and we call it Chesterton Academy, I could create a national base for it right away, give it a national profile right away. Of course, he was very supportive of that idea. And so we did made a national splash, even though we were just a very tiny school starting out. But because of the interest in Chesterton and the work of the Chesterton Society, that helped the school tremendously in its early years. And then at a certain point, people started coming to us saying, "Well, we'd like to do the same thing that you're doing." And we were saying, "Well, we haven't quite figured out what it is we're doing yet." But at that point, we had to start packaging it up and making it available to other folks who wanted to start the same thing. So we created the Chesterton Schools Network, and at that point, we put the two interests together, and so we combined the Chesterton Society with the work of the Chesterton Schools Network, and one umbrella organization for two of them. And there's one still has its evangelistic aspect to it. Just getting people to know about Chester, learn more, and he's still the great convert maker. But then the education branch. But they really go together because education is a form of evangelization.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How many do you have? Did you say that? How many?
Well, I didn't, and this is where your mind starts to get blown. So we started the first school in 2008. The second school didn't really get established till 2014. And then there were maybe 4 schools that started within a short period of time around 2014. Next year, there will be 60 schools around the country. Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah, it is
just
amazing.
It started slow, but has exploded. That's really incredible.
It's been an explosion. That's what it's been, and I think we can thank the downfall of the public school systems, the exposure that came from the COVID debacle. People started watching what their kids weren't learning right in their living room, and people were starting to look for other options at that point.
Well, how many have you added in the past 3 or 4 years then?
Yeah.
With
it's 10 opened this year.
Wow.
10 the last year. So I mean, most of them have been just in the last few years. We'll have 14 new schools adding next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's really, since COVID happened, it's really just exploded.
That's been the explosion. Yeah. We were opening schools while other people were closing schools during the COVID thing. Yeah.
Well put. I do think as awful as COVID was and the things surrounding it, it's interesting to see the good things that have come out of it. God is using a horrible situation to bring about a lot of really positive developments, I think.
Amen. Including conversions, which is really interesting. People who watched their screens, which is what most people were doing during COVID, right? Didn't only watch bad stuff.
Well, that's right.
So
myself and my family were all converted during that period. I mean,
is that right?
Yeah, my wife and 2 of my daughters were confirmed in the late summer and fall of 2020, and then I was confirmed in January of 21. But
wow,
all as a result. Well, I mean, there were things building, but it was that time period that kind of provided the inflection point for all that to happen.
Isn't that something? Well, thank the Lord. That's really something.
Yeah. So it's So I mean, it's something that, as much, and you'll be hard pressed to find somebody who really hated the whole lockdown thing more than me, but at the same time, I do recognize, and it keeps registering with me when I see these positive things that have come out of that kind of debacle and disaster that was COVID. But sometimes we need bad things so that good may come, I suppose. But
that's certainly how the Lord seems to work a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's incredible to see that explosion, and No, obviously, exponential growth seems ahead for you. So that's a long way from walking into that meeting in 1990, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like that. I walked into that meeting just a few days ago, so it seems like it's gone pretty quick. You say a slow start, but I don't remember anything except whoosh.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, that going from that kind of meeting but within a generation,
Yeah.
You have all of these Chestertonian outposts, not simply for people, mine and your age who remember 1990, and that doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
Right.
But you have the next generation and the next generation coming through the door, learning who G.K. Chesterton was.
Yes.
And they know who G.K. Chesterton is. And so you're talking about planting seeds that will last a century, at least into the next century, which is pretty incredible to think about. And they'll be doing the 200th anniversary Chesterton conferences then.
That's right. That's right.
But that is an amazing thing. So, well, I wish you continued success with all of that. Well, I'm going to selfishly now ask you about a trip that you made last fall to Genoa, Italy, and you and I happened to be there at the same time, as it turned out. What led you to an interest in Genoa?
Well, I could tell you why I was first interested in Genoa before I even found out about this trip.
Right. Well, yeah, I want to go back to that.
Yeah. I had, it actually goes back to my conversion. One of the hard things for a Protestant to grasp is the concept of purgatory. And I read Dante's Divine Comedy, which is an excellent way to start to learn about purgatory for someone who's a total outsider, because it's so artistic in terms of the book itself. And the commentary I read was, because you can't really read Dante without reading a good commentary along with it, was by Dorothy L. Sayers, who was Anglican, and yet she believed in purgatory. And she said, and she had translated this particular version, and she said that translating, the Purgatorio was more fun even than translating the Inferno. And so I started gaining appreciation for purgatory. But then shortly after my conversion, it was recommended to me that I read Catherine of Genoa and her writings on purgatory. And by far, that was the best thing that anyone could ever read on purgatory is Catherine of Genoa's writings on purgatory. And it goes totally against most people's impression of purgatory. In fact, Dante goes against most people's impression of purgatory. It's always associated with the suffering and the pain, whereas the souls in purgatory in Dante are, well, they're suffering, but they're looking forward to what lies at the end of purgatory, which is paradise. They know They know what's going to happen. They're saved, actually, and they're just getting ready to meet God, which is the most marvelous sense of anticipation. And it's why we should have that attitude now, as we live here with the church militant, that we are going to see God, and yeah, we have to suffer a bit before we get there. And cleanse ourselves, prepare our souls to meet God. That's the impression you get from Dante. But with Catherine of Genoa, it's truly the fiery love of God. It's about experiencing the love of God, and you're not thinking about getting ahead of someone else in line. You're not. All these funny images that are almost cartoonish of purgatory just go away. And so when I read that, then I started learning just more about her life, and she was just an incredible saint. And I said, boy, that, she's just had a permanent place in my brain. I even wrote a play about Catherine of Genoa that we performed at Chesterton Academy. It's called The Fiery Love of God. The play went really well. We just put on a really good production. And so there's that. Okay. And then my son, Adrian, who has become a very good friend of your colleague, Tom Ruby, who between the two of you have created the cultural debris phenomenon at the tours. Adrian calls me up one evening and said, I'm going to Genoa. And I said, I'd love to go to Genoa. He goes, well, you can.
You too could go to Genoa.
Yeah, you should. And he was telling me that about Tom Ruby's cultural debris tour, and I said, that sounds great. And my wife's sitting next to me, and my wife was born in Italy, and
she was handy to have around.
Oh yeah, and she is a very good traveling companion in Italy. Yeah, it really helps to have her there. But I said, have you ever been to Genoa? She goes, no. I said, neither have I. And I said, if we don't go now, we're never going to go. And she goes, yeah, that's right. I said, okay, let's go. Okay. And this meant she had to get a week off teaching, and we had to make a lot of arrangements, but we didn't even hesitate. We made the decision in less than a minute, and that's why we came to Genoa. Right there, that's why we came.
Well, we were glad you did. Yeah. So, what? Tell me what your impressions of Genoa was. And of course, we visited the church. I know that was one of your one of the particular things you wanted to do was visit St. Catherine's church.
Yeah.
And which turned into a little bit of an adventure for us while we were there. But
well, because you're not only visiting her church, you're visiting her. She's right there in a glass coffin, incorrupt. She's aged a little bit. People do after 500 years.
Yeah, it happens.
But she's all there. And it's just incredible. You get to meet the saint face to face. Yeah, certainly that was one of the great highlights for me. But it was such a great way to visit a place in Italy by spending an extended amount of time in one place and learning about that place, the history, the present culture, and of course just the beautiful art and architecture, which you just have to absorb on all levels. So going to the churches, learning the history, and then the fellowship we had both around the table and as we traveled to these places together. It's a less explored part of Italy, and so it was less touristy, but it's got such a rich tradition and fabulous eye-popping scenery, as all of Italy unfairly does.
That's right. Yeah, they hoard so much of it to themselves. That and all the good food.
Yeah, the good food. So we took advantage of all those things, and it was, it wasn't too overdone. Most, a tour can always has the weakness of just packing so much in that you're just so exhausted and you can't enjoy things. Whereas by being there a week, we just had a couple activities each day that you guys designed so well, and that made it a combination of manageable and truly restful and restorative. So we were not exhausted when it was all over. We were actually restored.
Yeah, it is a wonderful place and incredible to see, and visiting that church was, it was moving for me. First time I had been in there as well. Well, Tom and I had scouted it out and located it, but to go in there and have the saint right there. I mean, so often, of course, you'll have a sarcophagus or something where the body is in here, but there she is. She's elevated and in this glass sarcophagus. kind of overseeing everything.
Yeah. And of course, it was sort of dark in the church, and I think you were on a reconnaissance mission to find a way to light the church,
yes,
and you did.
So when we got there, there was literally no one there. I mean, the church was open, but there was no one in the church that we could find. We and I particularly searched all over to try to find someone because the lights weren't on. It wasn't a time for a mass or anything. They just had the church open. So they had on these little side chapels light switches or boxes that you could flip the fuse switch on, but nothing was coming on for hers. So we finally found behind the door the full electrical box for the whole church, and you had to flip the right switch on it in order to power the switches where she was. So it was sort of a multi-part. When we go back, we'll know how to do that. But I thought this is the only time probably in my life that I will have the opportunity to flip the switch to turn on the light for a saint. I mean, when's that going to happen? When am I ever going to do that again? But it was an interesting setup because she's elevated, but they had a stairway that went up to a little seating area behind her where you all were able to go and pray and spend some time. And I went up there as well, but it was interesting how they had that whole setup designed.
Truly. Well, I can also say one of the great serendipitous moments of the trip, a surprise, something that you had not planned, something that we discovered when we got there at the behest of the lovely ladies who hosted the properties where we stayed, was the cemetery.
Absolutely amazing. That
was such a discovery. And they call it an outdoor museum, but it's just one of the greatest examples of 19th century sculpture.
The monumental cemetery of Stagliano, I believe it's called.
Place of beauty and contemplation.
And it's hard to describe to people how many statues there are. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds. Maybe, I don't know, maybe thousands. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
But they just keep going. And all of these, I guess the wealthy of Genoa would commission these full life-size, sometimes larger than life-size statues that were carved just for this cemetery. And there are angels, and there are people on boats, and there are saints, and it's really an amazing place. And has to be one of the most extensive cemeteries of its kind in the world. I can't imagine that there are many like that.
There are a few like it from the same time period, but I think that one really takes the cake. I guess the one in Milan, which is not too far away, is on the same level of elaborate sculpture and going on and on forever. But this one is a special spot. There's no question.
Yeah, I think they perhaps they in Milan were trying to outdo each other because Genoa, of course, is a relatively short train ride or bus ride from Milan, not very far. In fact, Tom and I flew into Milan when we came. I think you all did too.
It's so unlike the Italians to be competitive. Do you really think that they're... So, yeah, Mark Twain wrote about the cemetery in Milan in his Innocents Abroad book, and it was fun to come home after the after our trip and read Mark Twain's book, because he went to many of the same places we went to.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think that there was a scene in one of the James Bond movies that originally had been filmed for it. I'm not sure if it made it into the final cut, but when I was reading about the cemetery, that they I think Blofeld had been buried there supposedly or something. But and and Bond goes in and there's an attempted assassination of him or something. But it's impossible for us to convey the magnitude of it, and I think even pictures can't do it justice, because you have these incredible statues in isolation, but part of it is just the immensity of it. And
Right.
and we spent several hours there, and I
Yep.
know didn't see it all by any means.
No.
So those interested in seeing it we certainly will be going back to see that again. But of course, Catherine, going back to Catherine briefly, she lived around the same time as Christopher Columbus. So she and Columbus, who of course was also from Genoa, were contemporaries there. Obviously, he moved on for sailing adventures, but it's even surmised they may have known each other in their younger days.
Yeah, theoretically, it was not that big a city. They could have met each other or known each other. And in the play I wrote, I have an imagined scene between the two of them as that they're childhood friends. And, and so that was fun.
And that's not far fetched at all.
No, not at all.
They very well may have, and probably would have run in those similar circles and so forth. As you said, it wasn't. I think it was probably one of those small big cities.
Exactly.
that where people just would have interacted. They would have known each other, and so
people would have known each other. That's the thing; they would have known each other.
Yeah. So you have a saint and the the discoverer of the New World. And of course, they have when you come into the train station, they have a very large statue of Christopher Columbus that's sort of dominates the skyline right there. But interestingly, St. Catherine has a very low profile in the city. There doesn't really seem to be a lot pointing to her.
Yeah, that was, I think, a surprise for all of us too. We asked people where the church was a couple of times; they didn't know, and we talked with other people about St. Catherine Genoa. They did not know who she was. So here's this really significant saint, unknown in her own city. Mm-hmm. Just the words of Christ, the prophet is without honor in his own country.
That's right. I mean, we visited, of course, the cathedral, and we stayed near San Siro Church and visited a number of large, magnificent churches in the city. Her church is, she's the one who's a saint, obviously, of course, San Siro was too, but relatively recent. 500 years ago isn't that long ago for a saint, really.
Right.
And there's really no reference to her, no indication about her in these other larger, more magnificent churches. And her church is, I mean, it's a beautiful church. It's not nearly as grand as some of the others, but it's kind of out of the way. You have to know where it is.
Right.
It seemed to be that it's largely at this point an immigrant church. It's the masses were in Spanish, according to the signs. I think they also have Italian masses, but there's a large immigrant community that really uses the church where she is most of the time.
It was run by a religious order. I think was it the Franciscans who ran the church?
Possibly, I don't remember. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so it's talking about cultural debris. There's you have one of the most significant people to ever come from Genoa to ever live there, and certainly one of, as you pointed out, her writings still carry tremendous weight. but there doesn't seem to be an ongoing recognition or cult of Catherine.
And it makes you wonder, Alan, if one of the reasons is because we don't think about purgatory as much.
Well, that may be. That may be. We need to talk about, to Bishop Barron, after the Eucharistic revival is done, maybe we need a purgatorial revival. That might be a harder sell, but
it will be a very hard sell. But I think it's probably what we need. I think the medieval times, which is the high Middle Ages, is the high point of Catholic civilization. Purgatory was on everybody's mind all the time, and that made them live better lives. It really did, and that's also made them build beautiful art. I think there's a connection.
Yeah. No question about that. Yeah. Talking about saints and talking about Chesterton, let's touch on Chesterton a little bit. There is a cause for his canonization. Tell me about.
There isn't officially a cause. Yes, okay.
Cause. But there's a cause for the cause. How's that?
Yeah. So I can take you through that. A lot of people don't know the logistics of how a saint is made.
I certainly don't. So please enlighten me and everyone else.
So it's not like the Catholic Church says, well, who should we make a saint? This week or this month. Who needs to be recognized? It's not. The church doesn't decide who's going to be a saint. A cult of the saint's followers makes the petition to the church, and then they open a cause for sainthood.
Okay.
So it always starts from the bottom up. That's the most wonderful thing about the sainthood, is that it's not just a top-down thing. It is the church wants to know that there is a following of a particular individual, and that indeed this person is answering prayers. Not only are people asking for his help, but he's granting help. So that shows that he is in the presence of God. But first they have to establish that he had a heroic life. So the way it works is you have a cult, and that's the word, a cultus, a group who follow that saint and who bring the petition to the church, to a bishop, and a bishop then officially opens the cause. That's the stage we're at right now, is trying to get a bishop to open the cause, and we're, I would say, very, very close to that happening. And so I think the cause will officially be opened sometime relatively soon, and then that the candidate is declared a servant of God by the church. Before the bishop opens the cause, the Congregation for Saints in Rome has to issue a nihil obstat, that we have no objections to you opening the cause. And that's the only thing that would ever kill it, stop it from being opening, is the Congregation for Saints saying, no, you can't do that. So a bishop can do it, and it has to start with a bishop opening the cause. And then begins the work of a postulator to do a full and deep and thorough investigation and report on the candidate's life. Now, who do you suppose chooses the postulator?
Would it be the bishop who opens the cause?
That's what you would think, but the answer is no.
Oh, okay.
But you were required to answer that,
okay.
Alan. Yeah. Then your next. Well, obviously the Congregation for Saints appoints the postulator. Wrong again. So you've been wrong twice now, Alan.
Well, it's not the first time or the second time.
So the answer is the petitioner chooses the postulator, because the postulator is representing the cult, representing the people who want this candidate to be beatified. And so they have to really make the case. And when they have completed the case, they present it to the Congregation for Saints. In the old days, there was what they called the devil's advocate, but that's not an official position anymore. But still, what the Congregation for Saints does is they do a thorough examination and basically interrogation to make sure that everything holds up before they then declare the candidate venerable. And once they are venerable, then the next vote comes from heaven, which is the evidence of a miracle, and through that saint's intercession, one miracle for beatification and another miracle for canonization. And that's how it works. Piece of cake.
Yeah, that's right. So looking back at, I guess, at other causes that have been initiated, what's the timeline, or is there a timeline? I mean, I know, we can look back at, say, Pope John Paul II. Obviously, you had a situation there where you have a very hurried, some have argued too hurried of a process. Obviously, that wouldn't be the case here. What sort of timeline range, I guess?
What we have with Chester is, assuming the cause gets open within a year or two, there's a lot of work to do for the postulator because of how prolific Chesterton was.
Right.
But I think that just as they did in the case of St. John Henry Newman, they did a dispensation so that only his writings after his conversion needed to be evaluated. What he wrote before his conversion really doesn't enter into the consideration because he wasn't a Catholic then. So
right.
I can't hold that against him or for him, really. And so that would shorten the amount of work that has to be studied, at least. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, the work of the Chesterton Society is that we've gathered all these writings. We have them all available now, so they can be studied. They're all very accessible. And but you'd assume it's going to be probably 5-6 years before that could safely be evaluated, so that nothing turns up that's funny. And then the Congregation for Saints, however long they take to evaluate and to make a decision. We do know that there are sympathetic people there now. How long they'll be there, we don't know. Sometimes there's a popular momentum which moves things along, as it did in the case of John Paul II and Mother Teresa and Jose Maria Escriva too. But other saints have taken 500 years to be canonized. Yeah, I mean, Thomas More, Joan of Arc, right? Yep. But it's God's timing. I think I want to believe it'll happen in my lifetime, obviously, and it just all depends upon how long I live. But I think it's theoretically possible that it could happen within 10 years once this thing gets going. And I don't think that's out of the range of possibility at all.
Well, it's interesting with Chesterton because, and I guess you could argue the same with Newman, but who's my patron saint, confirmation saint, is John Henry Newman. But you have some of Chesterton's key works that have influenced people towards conversion. He wrote prior to his own conversion. I mean, he was actually influencing. He was influencing people towards conversion successfully before he himself had converted.
Yep.
Which is really an incredible thing.
Yep.
So
yeah, I know. A prime example is Monsignor Knox, who Ronald Knox, because of orthodoxy, that really made him move towards the Catholic Church. And then when Chesterton himself was ready to be instructed, Monsignor Knox is one of the people he talked to.
Well, I've been reading Joseph Pierce's Literary Converts on my bedside table at this moment, and of course, he talks about just that and others who Chesterton influenced, and obviously that the influence from those earlier works have continued. Orthodoxy was one of the first Chesterton books I read over 20 years ago, I guess. it took a while for it to sink in, but
Well, you have to read that book several times. I think I don't think one reading's ever going to do it for anybody. Yeah.
But
And it's not that difficult a book. You just have to keep reading it because there's so much there.
Yeah. Well, an exciting prospect. A long way from walking into that room in 1990. So you have shepherded his cause, lowercase c cause, well, all these decades. So I guess there are a couple of more steps to go. So that's something to keep you busy.
I hope to keep busy. I don't like just falling into complete sheer boredom. But I will say that becoming friends with Chesterton and having him walk beside me has been one of the great pleasures of my life. And the reason I believe he's a saint is because saints are your friends, and they show that they are advocating for you, and that's what Chesterton has done for me.
Well, I have my own little personal litany of kind of literary figures that I will appeal to in prayer from time to time, and Chesterton is in my little personal litany. So he does hear from me, probably not as often as he should, but he does.
So great, that's good.
Well, if folks want to, they can see both you and me and other people like this Bishop Barron guy in Minneapolis this summer at the end of was it July 27th? I think
July 27th to 29th in Minneapolis, and go to chesterton.org and register. And there's still some space, but we will run out of space, so please start making the move as soon as you can. Chesterton.org.
And we will see those folks and hang out with them and afterglow with them, and there may be free beverages of some sort. You never know.
I think so.
You think that's safe?
Yeah.
Well, Dale, thank you very much for being on, and it's good to see you again after our time in Genoa. It's not a lot of people I hung out with for a week overseas, and it was a lot of fun. Perhaps you can join us again sometime, but I look forward to seeing you in Minnesota.
Likewise, Alan, and thanks for having me on your Cultural Debris podcast today.
All right, I'll see you at the Chesterton Conference.
Great. God bless.